And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Pacific salmon species vary in terms of their life cycles. Some spend hardly any time in the streams, some spend years. Some mature in 2 years of age, some mature at 5. Some live for only a couple of years, others live for 10. And some, like steelhead and cutthroat, can even spawn more than once. On today's Open Connection, President of Genesis Environmental Sciences Limited, Peter Kahn.
I grew up on Atchlitz Creek, which is a small creek, and my dad built us things to play in the creek, including a pontoon boat. He was a sheet metal fabricator. So that was my first experience with pontoon boats, and that relates to the story that we're talking about today. I studied to be a chemical environmental engineer doing environmental sciences, and I was always brought up on the creek hunting and fishing, and so that brought out the interest in the environment. And so I've had 38 years as a senior environmental engineer with the federal government, plus I did consulting on the side, and I've done training for international agencies like Interpol and various other government agencies. When I retired from the federal service in 2018, I began to plan what I would do for the next 5 or 6 years of my career. I wanted to do something I really got excited about. And I became aware of the issue of salmon populations declining. And I grew up on the Fraser River, the lower Fraser River, and I saw the issues related to the harvesting techniques there and the impact they were having on salmon bycatch. So I thought to myself, I'm going to research this and see if I can develop a better system of catching fish. And that led me for the last 2 and almost half years researching on how to design a portable, scalable, and transportable system that could be used to selectively harvest salmon and not injure bycatch like endangered species or the sturgeon or steelhead and that sort of thing. Every technique has an impact on the fish that they catch. And things like gill netting have been shown to have at best a 50% survival. So if you have an endangered steelhead in that gill net and you take it out and revive it, it's got about a 50% chance of surviving and getting to the spawning grounds on its first encounter. The technology I'm developing is based on what's called a pound net. And the pound net comes from the word impoundment. We create some kind of a corral. So if you think of cattle ranching, you got to get the fish into the corral, and then you can select out the fish that you want. So let's say it's a hatchery marked Chinook salmon, and there's wild salmon in there. So you only pull out the hatchery marked fish and you let the wild stock go. And the survival rate on this technique has been shown to be 95 to 99%. So the incentive here from an engineering perspective and a biological perspective is there's 50% of the fish available to go to the spawning grounds. So let's say we start with 100 Chinook salmon and they come into a gill net. Only about 50% of those would survive to get to the spawning grounds if they have their first encounter. In the lower Fraser, when they do gill netting on the Fraser River, they can take out 97% of the fish. And there's multiple nets after that. So even if a fish got released from one net, it's likely to encounter another. And by the second or third encounter, that fish doesn't have the strength to go to the spawning ground. Not only that, there'll be wounding from the net and the gills and on the body. So that opens up opportunity for invasive bacteria to start infecting the fish, which again draws on the energy source that the fish needs to get to the spawning grounds. So with pound net technology, the fish does not get injured. It does not get taken out of the water, so it's not exposed to oxygen. And hopefully humans don't actually touch the fish. And that allows the survival rate to be in the 95 to 99% range. So what that means, if we have 100 fish that were going into gill nets and only 50 making it past the first encounter, if we had 100 fish going into the pound net and we took out 50 fish, most of those 50 fish that we release would also survive a second or third encounter and not be infected and reach the spawning grounds in a fitness level that allows them to spawn and lay the eggs and create the next generation. So if you go to the Babine Lakes area, and you would see that historically they created basically pound enclosures by placing a bunch of sticks in the water and creating a fence-like area. What we've done is designed a pontoon-based platform that we can make any length and any width. and it has the geometric shape underneath that allows a net to be hung underneath it. And then I've also designed a system whereby we can install posts and do a guidance net. We call them wing nets that actually funnel the fish to the pound net. And what that does is it gets the fish into the pound net, and then we close off the pound net and gently lift the net underneath. And on the pontoon platform, there's actually 1 or 2 access holds. So people that are fishing on there open up the access hold, the fish are brought to the surface, and with a dip net, they can gently dip net out the fish that are harvestable. Once they've got those ones out, they open up a release gate, and the rest of the fish just keep swimming.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. After 2 years of research, Genesis Environmental Sciences Limited has developed a prototype concept design for selective fishing, which is successfully tested will allow for selective capture of vibrant stocks of salmon while releasing at-risk stocks unharmed. This would result in high-quality salmon which do not have net marks and will fetch a higher market price. Let us return to the conversation as Peter explains how river trap works.
First of all, under the Fisheries Act, you're not allowed to completely block off a stream, so you have to allow passage. So there's regulations that deal with this. But the concept is, if we're looking behind us here and we can see sort of a swirling water area, we can mount the platform at the exit of this place and then do the nets in a formation so that they go partway along the edge of the current. So fish that are coming into the rest area then find their way into the entrance and then into the pound net. So the idea is to not only selectively catch fish, but only take a portion of the fish that are going up the river. Marked selective fishing is an idea that's really starting to gain strength. On the lower Fraser and around British Columbia, if we take Chinook for example, Chinook are monitored by what are called coded wire tags. It's a small wire that has a particular marking on it. And at the hatchery, that marking is injected into the head of the fish. And then they clip the adipose fin, which is the little rear fin that doesn't hurt the fish at all. So that is done with about 10% of the Chinook in British Columbia. If we compare that to Washington State does 100%. What we're also advocating is that 100% of the salmon and steelhead that are produced in British Columbia hatcheries get marked by clipping the adipose fin. What that does is it allows, when the fish come into the trap, it allows a very quick visual distinction as to which are hatchery fish, which can then be taken out because they're the harvestable stock, and the wild stock can be seen immediately, so we don't even take them out of the water and we just let them go and escape. In the lower Fraser, as an example, Thompson River steelhead are in a real dire strait. There used to be on average 5,000 fish or so reaching the spawning grounds in the Thompson River. It's a world-renowned fishery. Now they're hoping 100 to 200 fish will get there. The problem is, as in the Skeena, as in the Fraser, at the start it's called a mixed stock. So you have all these stocks mixed together. There's the abundant fish and the endangered fish. And if they're mixed together and they get caught in a net, then you catch the endangered fish like the steelhead and they don't survive and the stocks continue to decline. The way of getting around this is what we're talking about with the First Nations that I'm working with in the lower Fraser, is that as these fish move up the river, in this case we're working on the Harrison River, the Harrison stock will self-separate and go up the Harrison. If we have one of these platforms in place, then we can selectively take out fish in incremental manner throughout the whole run. And what that does is, let's say there's an allocation, and we'll use the number 100 fish, right? If there's an allocation for 100 fish, then the Department of Fisheries can specify how many days are open for selective fishing and how many days are open for other types of gear. And when we do that, we can compare the success rate of the two types of fishing. We're at the first stage of our research project. So on the Harrison, as example, we're going to build 1 or 2 platforms. And they can be set up in series as you go up the river. Once we have finished our testing there and we see that those platforms work, the reason I'm up here in the Skeena Bulkley is in the 2nd and 3rd years of our research project, we want to establish a network of platforms in the various communities. The platforms themselves also have the ability to put scientific equipment on them. So we can actually put on fish sensing equipment that can be connected to the internet, and we can actually track the fish and the fish populations as they go up the river system. So it really depends on, you know, where the water is that's suitable for these things and the communities that we get engaged to start installing them and having the tests run. So for example, if we look at the water behind us and if there was a platform there, we have a piece of equipment called Aries Sonar. This was actually developed by the US Navy for submarine detection. So it also detects fish. So it's basically like the ultrasound at a hospital. When you want to go see what the baby is, it's the same idea. So it sends a beam of sonic waves across the river, and as fish go by, it pings, and you can actually see the shape of the fish, the size of the fish, so you might even be able to determine whether it's a Chinook or a pink salmon or a coho salmon. The other thing that is able to do is, right now, some of the universities are catching Chinook salmon up in the Queen Charlottes that are bound for the Fraser River. So they install what's called a passive integrated transponder tag. So it's a little electronic microchip about the size of a big grain of rice. What we can do is we have a special antenna that sits at the bottom of the trap. And as these fish go through, there's a magnetic field generated. And when it passes through the magnetic field, it generates a 10-digit code unique to that salmon. That 10-digit code goes into a data logger where it's stored on a disk, and then it goes to either a cellular or satellite transmitter, and again, we can send that information to any computer in the world.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. To ensure sustainable fishing practices, the entire BC coastline and also rivers have been mapped and divided into clearly defined and labeled fishing areas. Each year, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Integrated Fisheries Management Plan clearly outlines the fishing areas that can be fished, when and by which gear type in the given year. Let us return to the conversation as Peter shares how local schools can help.
I've been up here talking with various community groups and the high schools and the universities, and what we're developing is a plan by which to grab this information and manage it. So one of the projects would be to get a number of high schools involved, and they would set up a website, and each high school could go out, collect the information from the platform in their area, load it onto the website, and then it would post on the website in real time what's happening in that river system. So the more platforms we have on the river system, the more definitive the information becomes. And above them, what I'm hoping to get, and I've got UNBC involved, is to get undergrad or graduate students to supervise the high school students. So the undergraduate and graduate students would be doing their research papers and working with professors. So the data that comes from the platform is collected by the high schools, put into UNBC, and we collect all that data and start to publish it. What that does is we'll give you a profile of the fish migrating up the river. Well, that data can be transferred up into Department of Fisheries, Oceans, and BC Environment, which are responsible for managing the fish. Once they get that information, they can get a better sense in real time of what the fish run is doing. That allows them to post that information for the public to view. So if food and ceremonial, sport anglers or commercial fisheries are involved, they would get a much better accuracy of the run numbers, and if DFO sets certain limits for certain types of fishing, you could actually see on the website the run progress and where it is relative to being able to collect fish. 3 years ago, I worked with a number of elected officials, both MLAs and MPs, and got together with the sport fishing group as an example. And we came up with 7 objectives that we wanted to see. And one of the 7 objectives was fair and clear notice of fishery openings. So that is what this data collection will feed into. It will allow Department of Fisheries to have better data, transmit it to the public, and then the fishing population and even the general public will have a better understanding of why there's an opening or a closure. So if we set the bar for an opening of whatever it is, food and ceremonial or sport fishing, and we see the population graph past that opening, then they'll know, okay, there's enough fish in the river and we can go harvest them. Through UNBC, they operate an environmental program with high school students. And at this point, the high school students have been learning the basics of collecting water samples, but they really don't know why they're doing it and what good does it do. And I made a career out of doing environmental assessments and criminal investigations and ran a training course, and I've also worked with university and other governments. So we're going to put all that information together, and what will happen is a high school student that's maybe interested in biology or chemistry, they can work under their high school teacher to participate in the program. So let's say Kitsim-Kalem High School right here had a number of students, and the platform was out here behind me. Well, part of their high school program, their science program, would be to come down here when they're collecting fish and maybe take tissue samples of fish. So we can actually measure the energy in a tissue sample of fish, and we could see how the energy level of fish changes. So the students would collect that data. They would collect like water quality data, temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, and all of these things that are necessary for fish health. And they would do that as part of their school curriculum. And so UNBC and the high schools are already working on that. They just wanted something that they could apply it to. Well, this is a real world environmental problem, and this will allow these high school students to engage in it, and more importantly, to see if this is the field and the career that they want to progress to. The work that I'm doing with the First Nations down on the Fraser, we've applied for funding under what's called the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund. So that fund helps us do the research, and so we set up a budget for what we need to do, and we get input from that fund. But also the BC Steelhead Society from the Lower Mainland branch contributed $100,000, and that got the program going down there. And so we have, because we're working with almost 30 First Nations, if we get this whole thing going, there's between $2 and $3 million that will be put into that. Up here, the program that UNBC and the high schools are doing already have funding from various sources from education. There's something called the Vancouver Foundation, which is putting in money. So what I'm doing up here is now meeting with these groups, and we're preparing for the next stage to apply for that funding. That being said, that gets it going. But local community groups can put in funding, but the fish themselves, if we get it to the point where it's commercially viable, then revenue from that will help sustain the platforms and help sustain this program.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
In a far northwest corner of British Columbia, the watersheds of three important rivers, the Skeena, the Stikine, and the Nass, hold crucial wild salmon habitat, pristine wilderness, and deep cultural knowledge. Each year, salmon swim over 400 kilometers to spawn at the upper reaches of these rivers. In this final segment of Open Connection, Peter shares some ideas on how to ensure the salmon continue to return.
So let's go to the mouth of the Skeena. The fish are coming in bright and silver, and they have a high fat content, and there's no net marks on them. That makes them very valuable for table fare. So high-end restaurants, the supermarkets, they all want to buy fish that aren't marked up with net marks. So they'll get $3 to $4 a pound more for a fish that is in good condition and not marked up. As the fish swim up the river, they're using up their energy reserves and the fat content goes down. So let's say a third of the river up, they're better now for canning. And as they use more fat reserve, they're better for making candy salmon. And as they go right to the far end, they're actually better for salmon jerky, because you don't want as much fat in there when you're making the salmon jerky. So the salmon quality, even though it's changing as it goes upstream, has a particular food niche that it could actually be optimally used for. Much of the history of the Skeena and the Fraser, First Nations were involved in harvesting salmon and selling it. For example, in the Babine Nation, they were able to harvest, I think, up to 700,000 salmon using their weir system. They used that for their own food supply, but they also used it for the trade. So they were making income to the Hudson's Bay Company, to the local community that was growing up, the towns and everything, and selling the fish that way. In this respect, once we know that enough fish are making it and the endangered stocks are recovering, Then it's up to DFO and BC government to determine, okay, at what level can we now have a harvestable stock? And that will then allow economic opportunity. The spin-off of that too is there's a greater assurance that there'll be stock for the sport fishery, for the lodges that are making, tourism dollars, for the community that's supplying the hotel, motel, and the restaurant. So like salmon, has all this input into the natural system, it also has a real impact on the economic system. Once we have all the engineering in proper order, we can actually license the high school shop program to actually build a platform. So that will bring in students that have the aptitude for machining and welding and that sort of thing. The sides of the platform actually have an area where you can put up a metal panel, and that panel can be decorated in the artwork of the community and the natural history in the river. And it could be framed in a wooden frame, and at the end of the season that panel could be sold as a piece of art and generating income. The stories on that will reflect what's going on in that community. The other concept that I've been talking about, and this is with the Northern Tourism Board, is the idea of a salmon passport. So this would be like your passport that you get, that you show to the customs officer. One page could have a page of, say, the First Nations history of that area and a story that they want to tell. The other page could have of the local community history, and would have an area for a passport stamp unique to that community. So an artisan could design the stamp, and a tourist coming into the area that would want to learn about the natural history, the salmon, and seeing these platforms in operation could buy one of these passports at a local shop, a hotel, or a sports shop, and then go visit these sites and get these unique stamps as they go and visit the sites. I have my own website. It's www.genesisenvironmentalsciences.com, and I have a tab on there that says Selective Fishing Research, and basically a lot of this is described. The platform is designed to be very flexible, so it also has the aspect of being quickly converted to oil spill support and response. And this is better illustrated on my website, but all the materials that are on the platform can duplicate to go to oil spill response. So let's say we're at the mouth of the Skeena and there was a ship ran aground and oil was leaking out. Well, you couldn't catch fish then, right? But those people that have that platform can return to the shore, unload the nets, and load on oil spill containment booms and absorption booms. And there's already the fence post system that I've developed. They can go and install those posts, put the booms up to absorb the oil to protect the shoreline. Then they can take the containment booms to go out and contain the spill. And we actually have an oil skimmer, which is a device that puts a disc in the water and takes the oil out, that fits right in the hold that we've designed for taking the fish out. So everything is designed for this dual purpose, so it has an environmental emergency response capability as well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.